second piece that will have to approve, which is fiscal year 2020 institutional fees that you come out. So I think it's both of those.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Turning to tab 1 in your books, contracts and agreements, I'll highlight a few, and Matt Larson and I and others are here to answer any questions you might have on these or any contracts. But the ones I want to highlight today are number 1 on the list, which is with SPHI International. This is actually a pretty clean vanilla supply contract for hardware and software in IT. It's a 5-year competitive bid contract. I want to draw your attention to this is because we did this RFP as a joint effort between UConn and the Board of Regents system, the CSCU system. Something we're doing more and more with. Matt Larson, our head of procurement, and the procurement office for the Board of Regents actually work pretty well together. And when we see opportunities to bid together, we do. And this is an opportunity to do that. We think we're going to get better business terms when we add scale to the contract. The second contract I want to bring to your attention is number 2 on the list with the Wellfleet Group LLC. This is previously Consolidated Health Plans. This is a competitively bid contract to provide health insurance to uninsured students. The university requires students at the university to carry health insurance. Most students are on their parents' health insurance plans or have insurance through some other means. But about 1,600 students, both here and in the medical and dental schools, need insurance, and we provide that through the competitive bid process. This is zero cost to the university. We pass the premiums on in the form of a health insurance fee on the student's fee bill. We do use an independent consultant to help us with this. Lockton consultants are Lockton brokerage. Important to note they are a consultant on this, not a broker, so we are not paying them as a broker. But this is a competitively bid contract to wealthy. I think the product that we ultimately students will be in is a Cigna product or a Cigna network. I think Matt can confirm that. That's true. And then the last thing I'd like to bring to your attention is entry number 21. This is not a procurement contract, but it's brought to the board as a contract. This is more or less a partnership agreement or an agreement to provide discount to United Technologies Corporation. Provost Elliott can highlight this. So this is a contract with United Technologies to provide a tuition discount to employees that take professional programs through the relationship we have with UT. And again, we bring this to the board because it's a contract of significant size that we require for you. It's not a
There's probably one observation that's worth making, and that is that there's a board policy that is generic for any corporate entity in the state that has levels of engagement with us in excess of $1 million. UTC happens to be one that's currently in that category, but if other similar corporate entities came forward to support a lot of education, they would also be eligible for this system.
And maybe we're highlighting this is a very good relationship that the university has with UTC. While we mentioned the discount in the context of this contract, I think the net revenue of the university is in excess of per year. Well, the contract's over $1 million, so we know that about $1.2 million, $1.3 million per year relationship. Those are all the contracts I brought for you for discussion. If there are questions on those or any of the contracts on the list.
Are there any questions?
Yeah, you got a typo on number 17, black wording. You have it 500,000,000. So the total amount is correct.
Yeah, we want to correct that.
Number 17.
Number 7.
Any other questions or comments? And it's got the 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 have $0 amounts. We just wanted to call that to everybody's attention. It's just HVAC and plumbing supply contracts that are separated as needed.
That's right. Yeah, these are all plumbing and other supply contracts for our trades. In fact, they're all HVAC supply contracts. And they are zeros because what we negotiate with them is terms and prices, and then if we need to buy plumbing supplies, we buy them at those terms. We don't pre-contract or someone on a plumbing supply.
Great. Any other questions? Could I have a motion in a second to approve the contracts and agreements presented?
Second.
Thank you, Henry. All approved by? Aye. Any abstain? Any nays? Thank you. Motion passes. Scott, why don't you take us through the 2020 institution fees?
Sure.
Let's tap 14.
This proposal we're bringing to you today as attachments, is part of a broader effort at the university, what we call One UConn, where it makes sense to merge operations between UConn and UConn Health. The most recent merge that we've done is in our Bursar's office. The Bursar here in stores does billing and student accounts for close to 30,000 students. Over at the medical school, dental school, is it 800 students approximately? It just makes sense based on scale and technology that we fold those students into the Bursar system here. And at really no cost, not a very heavy lift at all for the Bursar in stores. But in doing so, there were two changes that we would like to make to the fee policies at UConn Health to make them consistent with the policies that we have in stores and regionals. And there are two. The first is that we impose a late fee at UConn Health for medical school and dental school that is the same as the late fee here. When students are late in paying their tuition bills in stores, they're charged a $150 late fee. That was designed a couple of years ago to encourage payment on time. We had such a low late fee that what we were seeing was habitual and large-scale late payment. My understanding is that it's actually not a problem in medical school and dental school, and so we don't think this fee would impose a hardship on anyone. Also important to note is that the Bursar is very liberal in waiving the fee. There's a legitimate reason. It's because your financial aid didn't come in. There's lots of good reasons why a student wouldn't pay their fee bill on time. The Bursar doesn't waive it in those circumstances. This is really for sort of genuine tardiness about the money. I just didn't pay on time. The second proposal is that we waive the $150 fee that is currently charged at the medical school and dental school in the fourth year of a student's time there for transcripts. So all students in their last year of medical school and dental school are charged a $150 transcript fee. That is designed to reimburse the university for the cost of providing transcripts, but it's a once in a lifetime fee. So that at the medical school and dental school, you get transcripts for life if you pay the $150 fee up front. Stores, we have a model where we charge a smaller amount per transcript. So these are the two changes we'd like to make. We think they're actually net positive. It's more likely all students pay the transcript fee, only the late students pay the late fee. So net, we think this actually will be an improvement, financial improvement for students in medical school and dental school. But most important is that we're consistent across the board so we don't have to reprogram the computer.
Thanks, Scott. Any questions for Scott? Could I have a motion and a second to approve the 2020 decisional fees for UConn Health?
So moved.
Second. Anyone abstaining from the vote? I'll recuse myself rather than abstaining. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Motion passes. Scott, can you take us through the capital consequences for approval?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With us today are Laura Cruikshank, Mike Jednak, and others who may be able to answer any questions that I can't answer, and I'll try to go fairly quickly through. Tab 15, we have a budget for build-out of a restaurant, what we're calling a quick service restaurant in the Student Union. Student Union has a food court that in the past has had privately owned, operated franchise operations. We have a Dunkin' Donuts there. We used to have a Wendy's, and we used to have a Panda Express. Increasingly, we're having a hard time retaining those private franchisees. Panda Express closed last year, and we have a vacant storefront in the Student Union, and we have not been able to attract anybody to take that space. But the Asian fast food style restaurant, very popular, students miss it. It was profitable, it just wasn't profitable enough for the franchisee to satisfy his license. And so that it wasn't the franchisee that pulled out, it was corporate that shut it down. What we're proposing in this vote is to spend $700,000 to renovate that space and for University Dining Services to self-operate an Asian fast food restaurant there. We expect that it will be profitable, as the previous occupant was, and that this project will pay for itself. And it will eliminate a vacant storefront in our student building. The proposal is to spend $700,000 of dining revenue. This is sort of self-contained within our dining operation on the project, and we expect this to be ready. I think this is scheduled to be ready in the fall. So this is based on the project. Turning to tabs, I would want to think about tabs 16 and 17 together. This is related to the Stanford parking garage demolition and related environmental remediation in Stanford. The original project was budgeted at $13 million to demolish the Stanford garage to build a surface lot there. As we've done that work, we have found that first of all, the garage is demolished and the surface lot is built. However, the garage was built many years ago by Bloomingdale's and was covered in PCB paint. And there are PCBs in the caulk between sections of the garage. And those PCBs have leached into abutting properties, and there's a concern that they may have leached also into the Mill River. The proposals taken together, 16 and 17, are to reduce the $13 million budget, this is tab 16, for the Stanford parking garage to $10 million, and close out the garage demolition and surface lot construction project at $10 million, and to create a new project related to the environmental remediation, which may go on for some time on the abutting properties, to take the $3 million and put $2.5 million towards the abutting properties and $500,000 towards the beginnings of remediation for the Mill River, which is really just testing, working with EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers at this point. But that is what these two votes are about.
Scott, do I remember that you are exploring, are you talking to Bloomingdale's about their rules? Is that?
Well, what we have done working through the General Counsel's office is we are doing the work that we need to do that is the research on how old. There's a lot of researchers that develop the case that the liability belongs to Bloomingdale's, and we are doing that research now around when the paint was put on the building, when it was last power washed or sandblasted. There's some event that we think may have happened in the past that caused all of this stuff to get into the soil, and so that is the research we're doing. We do want to lay the groundwork for the university and the state of Connecticut, not just absorbing this cost, because it will be substantial.
Well, if it's outdoors, maybe this work zone.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. And the longer time passes, like what's happened with the South Dorms, the harder it gets. But when we do make the case, and we did recover, I want to say $4.5 million on the South Campus dormitories. So we do sometimes. get it right.
Do we feel pretty good, Scott, about the, we're not going to see, yeah, here, PCBs and other properties, the 2.5 million? Do we feel good about that estimate for that?
Yeah, there's really two elements to the remediation. The first is the $2.5 million, and this is to remediate PCBs and abutting properties. I think there are, I'll get the number, 11 properties abutting. These are small residential properties, mostly backyards. And we've committed to dig up the soils and put good soils down and replace whatever we dug up, whether it's a shed or a flower garden or a swing set. That's really what this $2.5 million is for. And we're confident in those numbers because it's a pretty contained, known project. We have not gotten permission from all the property owners yet, so it will take some time to get through that process and to get this done. When it comes to the Mill River, I think we're at the sort of beginning of really understanding what deep EPA and the Army Corps are going to want us to do there. And there's real risk there. So we put $500,000 towards the testing and efforts to date out of the 13 that was originally budgeted. But I do want to make sure that the board is aware that there's risk. Oh, Laura tells me the abutting properties work has been bid. So that makes us, and we're within the 2.5. So we are very confident in that number.
Scott, a couple questions. Any complaints, legal challenges from the surrounding residents regarding this issue?
We have, and I'll sort of look towards Nicole on this, but
We have one pending lawsuit with one of the abutting property owners, and actually we filed a suit against the abutter. We are very close to resolving that lawsuit. We reached a settlement last week, but it's typical litigation that's extending a little. That's because that property owner was making it difficult, basically prohibiting us from taking apart the garage. And as part of that lawsuit, there's a couple of things there about easements and ownership of property, but that's the only existing litigation under that issue.
Thank you. Separately, the lot, surface lot, was it multi-level parking considered given the fact that parking is so scarce? And it's obviously a revenue opportunity, so was that actively considered?
at this time it wasn't because we really didn't have budget for that. But what we did was as surface lot is we think of it as a land bank, relatively cheap surface lot that if it makes sense in the future to, and there's a business model for multi-level to do that.
But it turns out that there's a lot of vacancy parking downtown Stanford. As we found when we shut the old lot down to build a new lot, they said they had 500 vacant spaces and nothing but a city lot.
That's a good point. We've been near to our campus is a city-owned garage and a privately owned garage, both of which had lots of vacancy. When we told them that we were tearing our garage down and we wanted to make a deal to get less expensive space for our folks in those garages, they actually worked with us and had plenty of vacancy. So there's we don't know how strong the market would be. In fact, the market, the challenge, the concern I have with parking at UConn, that I know that we've talked about at different times, is that if we own it and operate it and use it for our employees and students, we actually have embedded in some of our labor contracts charges that are below, so far below market that anything we build will lose money if we put our people in it. I think we would have to come up with a new business model where a private operator builds it and charges us for it or charges the public for it. I think there's a market for a public market for spaces, but university employees and students do not pay market in university properties.
One last thing on that lot, just because you know Stanford so well, is the nice thing about a flat lot there is it opened up the vista to the Mill River. So in the long-term future, maybe we would build a building on it, but even that's unlikely given how many buildings are available in proximity to that campus. Because Scott, we get calls all the time from developers who ask us if we want to, take their great building for price, including the big trading floor. We even got offered
The UBS trading.
yeah, we didn't know what we would do.
You could land us up in that.
Thank you.
So those are the Stanford votes, and again, to summarize, we want to take a $13 million project and split it into garage demolition and construction, and then separate numbers. Tab 17 would be to do flooding property restoration. And at some point in the future, we would have come for a third project vote, and that would be Mill River restoration when that's ready. Next project I'll turn your attention to is under tab 18. This is an ongoing effort to address code remediation in our campus laundry facilities. We have laundry in all of our dorms. We had some code issues with regard to the exhaust from the laundry that we have tried over the last several years to remediate in as inexpensive a way as possible. You've probably seen this book before, sort of start and stop over the last several years. The first attempt we tried was to use ventless dryers. We thought that we could more or less do it on the cheap. That did not work. And now we are back to you today with what we think is our final effort on addressing this. Again, this is a campus-wide effort of $3.2 million to provide proper ventilation for dryers in our campus laundry facilities. The next project to bring to your attention is under tab 19. This is to change out the building controls at our Avery Point campus. This is about $500,000, $526,000. This includes both the sort of central processing, the brains of the HVAC controls, but also all of the sensors and thermostats throughout the campus and the wiring to them, which is why it gets up to $500,000. This is being paid for about half by energy rebates through the utility. We call it the REC account. I'm sort of struggling to remember what REC stands for, but this is an energy rebate project that over a fairly short time will pay for itself. And the last project to bring your attention to is under tab 20. This is the beginning of this is our planning number, $1.2 million, to begin the work of replacing the boilers in our central utility plant. We are under a regulatory requirement to replace these boilers by 2023. And we have several boilers, all vintage 1960s, that need to be replaced. And this is the beginning of that project. And I think those are all the projects for this one.
Thanks, Scott. Can I have a motion for a second to approve the capital project budgets as presented? Thank you. Somebody want to abstain? Not all in favor, aye? Aye. Opposed? Thank you. There's some informational items for your review. No need for an executive session. I'll request a motion second to adjourn.
Second.
Aye. Mr. Chair.
Call meeting of the Board of Trustees to order. Roll call.
Chairman Kruger,
Here.
Amy Bissett,
Here.
Mark Boxer, Charles Bunnell, Sherry Cantor. Here. Richard Cartwright. Sanford Cloud.
Here.
Andrea Dennis Levine. Here. Maru Lindar. Here. Janine Gowan. Here. Brian Grover.
Here.
Dave Lehman.
Here.
Rebecca Lobo.
Here.
Paul Mounds.
Here.
Dennis Nayden. Kevin O'Connor.
Here.
Thomas Ritter.
Here.
Philip Rubin.
Here.
Sam Searles.
Here.
Nandan Tuma.
Here.
Diana Wenzel. Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Susan. I apologize for the inconvenience of needing to hold an executive session at the beginning of the meeting. I'd like a motion and a second to change the order of agenda for hold executive session at the beginning of the board meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. I'd like to call for a motion and a second to go into an executive session to discuss the following reasons to include but not limited to records, reports, statements, and strategy or negotiations with respect to collective bargaining pursuant to section 110B9. We have a motion?
So moved.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none, motion passes. I'd like the following to join the board for the Good morning. First, item of business, I want to welcome recently nominated Ryan Hurlbert as the State's Commissioner Designate of Agriculture. We look forward to you joining the board, Ryan, and replacing former Commissioner of Agriculture, Stephen Crispr. So welcome. I'd like a motion and a second to approve the minutes of the meeting of March 27th.
So moved.
Are there any corrections? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. I'd like a motion and a second to approve all the consent agenda items. Motion? Second? Thank you. Is there anyone who wishes to abstain on any item?
I'd like to abstain on Rule 1.
Noted. Any other abstentions? Is there anyone who wishes an item to be removed? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none, motion passes. President's report. President Herbst.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Howard University School of Law celebrated its 150th anniversary on Saturday, April 13th, with its sesquicentennial. Reception in Washington, D.C. More than 500 Howard Law alumni, friends, and members of the legal community attended the event. Howard Law presented several awards to alumni and friends who have made extraordinary contributions to their field. You see where this is going? Chief among them was our friend and colleague Sandy Cloud, who was honored with a Lifetime Achievement Award from Howard for his incredible career and critical contributions to public service and the public good. I know this is well-deserved, well-earned recognition. Of course, it means a lot to Sandy, Diane, their children, their grandchildren. For those of us who know Sandy, the fact that he would receive such a distinction comes as no surprise to us. So Sandy, very warm congratulations. Mr. Chairman, next month, UConn will hold its 140th commencement exercises. We'll confer more than 9,000 degrees, including everything from undergraduate degrees to PhDs. This is among the highest number of degrees that UConn has ever awarded during any commencement in our history. So that really reflects our enrollment growth in recent years. So we're incredibly proud of all of our graduates and their families. Definitely the best few days of the year for us. Finally, in keeping with this theme of our pride here, I want to recognize another person who has won a terrific award, and she's here today. Janet Pritchard. Janet, stand up, is Professor of Photography in UConn's Art and Art History Department, and she's received the 2019 Guggenheim Fellowship. A lot of you know this is one of the highest awards in the Academy, awarded by the Guggenheim Foundation to artists for significant exhibition or performance of their work, highly productive scholarship, or an outstanding record of publication for writers, scholars, scientists. Janet's amazing work as a landscape photographer is exhibited in galleries and museums across the United States and in the UK, so we congratulate her very much on this achievement. Thanks so much, Janet, for being here. We had a couple of other students who got terrific awards this year. 2 of them were going to come, but they had class, so that's a good thing. So we had students win Fulbrights this year, Truman Scholarship. Akshaya won the Marshall. this year, so just one after another and coming through my email. It's hard to talk about all of them, but we're super proud, and we'll make sure we get publicity out on all of them. So these are just some extraordinary folks. It's a happy time of year, so nothing negative to report, Mr. Chairman. It's all good.
I love it when it's all good. Thank you, Susan. Andrea, academic affairs committee report, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We voted, we met this morning, and actually the board voted on our, pretty much through the consent agenda, on most of the work that we had. But again, it's always highlighted by voting on the Distinguished Professor Awards, and we had the 3 professors, and they were both here and were recognized, which is always wonderful. And along with a couple of informational items, an update on the individuals that are on tenure track reappointments, and our update on the centers and institutes, which usually has to occur every 3 to 5 years. That concludes my report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Andrea. Andy, financial affairs.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. This morning, the Financial Affairs Committee met, and Scott gave the committee an update on bond sale that's occurring today. I think everybody heard about that. There's one item that requires a approval here, and that is on attachments 14 to 20. And so I'd like to make a motion in a second to approve those items.
So moved.
Second. Does anyone like to abstain from any of them? I'll abstain from one, the no. That being said, all in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes, and that's it.
Thank you, Andy. You've got health. Andy.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, the directors have not had since our last board of trustees meeting, so I have no report today.
Thanks, Andy. Joint audit and Westwood, Dennis.
No report today.
Thank you. Building, Grounds, and Environment Committee report.
Building Ground April 17th in Hartford, during the meeting. And we, our agendas have been active, and basically went through all the projects that we announced today. We're in pretty good shape moving forward, and the construction management oversight committee could not
For a change.
for a change, yeah.
Student Life Committee.
We're working on that.
Thank you, Chairman. The Student Life Committee met on April 17th at the Hartford campus. It's always good to see other locations. Student trustee Tumo reported on the student rec center fees and some misunderstanding because that will be going into effect in the fall. But we're trying to correct the misunderstanding and the fact that it's $250 per semester versus $500. And the student movement on sustainability and the Take Back the Tap movement you reported on. I'm sure we will be hearing more about that. Vice President for Student Affairs, Michael Gilbert, reported on counseling and mental health services and the campus pledge, which was a non-event and a commitment of First Amendment rights of all the students. And our students were, we should be very proud of how everybody acted at that event. Donna Corbel and Kim Cowan from the Center for Students with Disabilities reported on the center's program review completed this spring, and it was stellar. Of course, there's always room for improvement, but we should be very proud of the connectedness of the Center for Disabilities with all of our students and almost every location. They have an incredible connection and support students throughout the university. Christine Wilson, Assistant Vice President for Student Affairs and Director of Student Activities, shared about the spring weekend schedule, which under President Herbst has become, was sort of put on hold and reinvented, and the activities really are inspirational and great, and the students really look forward to it, and they've taken incredible ownership over it. Again, very proud record of all that is done during the spring weekend. Ellie Doherty outlined the suggested revisions to the policy against discrimination, harassment, and related interpersonal violence, and shared, and we will be voting on that at the next meeting. There will be a formal action we have to take, and shared information on Welcome to the PAC training module, which again, with leadership Herbst, there was a real movement of several students that were very concerned about some discriminatory talk and action and perceptions that they felt, and this is a very proactive way to deal with students and to talk about these very difficult issues and educate people, and I think could be a model for the country. The next meeting of the Student Life Committee will be fall when the students are back on campus. Thank you so much, Anna, for joining.
I appreciate the fact that you like to meet at other campuses, and I look forward to seeing you down in Stanford. And I'm impressed how busy you've been. Thank you, sir. Institutional events, Luna.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The committee met briefly to approve a number of items for the board to act on. More importantly, the search committee for the new president has arrived at the approval of the candidate. And so that is moving through the Allen Foundation Board. Tom Katsoulias has met with the candidate, and Susan and a number of other senior members of the administration from campuses. We are very happy with the candidate that we have, and so we can expect an announcement in the not too distant future. Thank you.
That's very good news. I know from personal experience that these searches are exhausting, so I'm glad you're coming to a happy day. Committee on Compensation Report, Rick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We did meet this morning, and we appreciate an hour of your time this morning. Wishing you being back at 9:30. Crispr, Chief Human Resource Officer, gave us a review of a draft of the leave benefits policy for management and confidential employees, which includes vacation, personal days, sick time, etc. For all campuses. The intent of this policy is to clarify and unify existing policies at Stewart and Farmington, which is a category of employee and part of the UConn 1 initiative. And that is very important.
Thank you. I think there's no other business and no executive session is anticipated. So before adjournment, since this is my last meeting, I would like to make some remarks. And my remarks are as follows. As you all know, I informed Governor Lamont that I would be stepping down as chair and member of the board as of today. If this is my last meeting, I want to take a few moments to reflect on my 8 years as trustee. As I have told a number of you, I'm not going to miss the job with its time demands and endless line of tough issues, but I will miss the people. And I want to express my thanks. I want to thank the governor for his support for UConn and our new president, Tom Katsoulias. And I wish the governor and his administration all the best and hope for their success. It's clear to me that Governor Lamont sees this flagship research institution under our new president as a vital contributor to the state and as a key to Connecticut's successful future. I look forward to President-designate Tom Katsoulias having the full support of the governor and this board during his tenure as president. Tom has much to offer, and I'm sure his vision for UConn will do much to ensure that the university will be the right partner in helping to drive the state forward. I want to thank the members of the board for their service. This is an all-volunteer board, as you all know. No one is paid to be here beyond an occasional hot lunch. Yet each of us individually is well compensated through the satisfaction that comes from serving this institution and its mission of teaching, research, and service. Without this board and the board's ethos of working always for the betterment of this university, UConn would not be the institution it has become. I want to thank Susan Hurst for not only how much she advanced this university during her 8 years, but also for all that she taught me about the complex but fascinating business of public higher education. Her tenure has been marked by growth and strength and importance of this university, and she is to be congratulated for that. We have every reason to expect the university to continue to increase in reputation and contribution under the tenure of our next president. I also want to thank Susan's senior reports, without whom the university would not function. There are too many to mention by name, but time does permit I call out the 4 special people with whom I work closely. Michelle Rubin, who's not here today, Scott Jordan, Eddie Aganobi, and Nicole Gelston. Thank all of you for the support you've given me, and thanks to many others whom I have not mentioned by name, and that includes Susan Locke and Debbie Girl. Thank you. And of course, there are the faculty who comprise the soul of this institution. I've had the pleasure to interact with many of you, and I've had the opportunity to meet with many more. This has been an enriching part of my experience as a trustee. Finally, I want to thank Governor Malloy, who appointed me, and Larry McHugh, who was chair of the board for most of my tenure as a trustee. I do not think the university ever has had 2 better friends. I know this about our university. At its most basic level, it is an institution of higher learning that serves the state of Connecticut and its students. The state has been visionary in his financial commitments to UConn, and UConn has rewarded that faith as a training ground for future employees of Connecticut businesses, in preparing professionals serving the state and its businesses, in training doctors, nurses, and other healthcare professionals, healing its citizens, and in contributing as a capable and supportive member in industry partnerships with Connecticut companies. But UConn is much more than that. A university like this one is not simply important in the present, it is also key to shaping the future. All across our campuses and classrooms, labs, residence halls, athletic fields, and operating rooms, the story of UConn is being written every day in a way the university is impacting lives both transformatively and immeasurably. Most importantly, UConn is producing graduates who are needed for today's and tomorrow's world, who think, who reason, who problem solve, and who contribute to our communities and the wider world as educated citizens and enlightened leaders. In essence, graduates who are needed for today's and tomorrow's increasingly complex and challenging world. It is through these efforts that UConn supports the future of Connecticut. It is through these graduates that the state drives forward. It is through these outcomes that the university fulfills its comprehensive mission. We're all here because we believe in this place and in this mission, and today UConn is stronger, better, and more promising than it ever has been. We face many challenges this year and the years ahead, but my fondest hope is that the university will meet those challenges with the same elan and success it has to date. If everyone on this board continues to put UConn first above personal ambition and first above personal agenda, I know the university will remain in safe hands, continuing to grow in impact and expand in reputation. It's been my pleasure to work on behalf of this institution, and with all of you, I wish UConn and each of you the very best. Call for a motion to adjourn.
Hold on.
Wait.
Okay. That was a good sentence.
If you call my name, I'll start. Tom, I want to thank you for your service and leadership of this board of the University of Connecticut trustees. You have served well, following in the big shoes of Larry Q. Among other things, you led a robust, inclusive, and successful presidential search, including in Tom Consolidation becoming our next president. You have been a strong and helpful partner in working closely with me in helping UConn Health Center reach its full potential, particularly as we pursue a public-private partnership with respect to our clinical operations. And I know that I speak for the board of the UConn Health Center as well as Andy Ekanobi, our leader. You have led with high integrity always and focused on the best interests of the university. On behalf of the board of directors of UConn Health and myself personally, we wish you the very best for a successful future.
I think you can have the thanks of this board as well for your hard work. And it has been a pleasure working with you, and we all hope that we will continue to see you and as you continue to be involved in the university and the rest of us. So thank you for your service.
Thanks so much, Marilla. Sandy, thank you, and thank you, Marilla. You and I joined the board together, and we went to our first athletics presentation together. Remember that? And it's been a wonderful year.
Tom, I also, 8 years ago, joined you. We had our first trip down to Avery Point.
You did?
Orientation, Robert and I and you. It's been a great run. And I can see that my friend and colleague. And just thank you for everything you've
You've had a great 8-year run on the board, and your leadership for the board has been very valuable. And to steal an old phrase, are we better off today because of you? The answer is absolutely yes. I treasure our professional and personal relationship. One of the things we could always count on, and that I could count on, was you always had the best interest of UConn in your heart and in your mind. And we got a lot done together, and I want to wish you, your wife and your family all the best. So go Huskies.
Thank you. Thank you, Dennis.
So Tom, I just want to add in, you've been a great friend and a great leader. And as we transition to financial Crispr, you gave me some coaching. It was really good, very helpful. But I always think of UConn as a family, and I've been around UConn since 1971, and it's always been a family to me. And what you've done in your leadership here, this board continues to do to make sure that we have a family and that our family helps each other and works together. And I think that your leadership just personifies that. And thank you very much for that. And good luck going forward. I know we're never be too far apart in many different ways, but thank you, Tony.
Well, those are very nice words, Andy, particularly since I'm not Husky, not a national board.
Tom, you were willing to learn. I remember the first time going to a basketball game, and you just sort of checked out basketball 101. You did your homework, and which was always very important, and maybe a little bit of explanations along the way, but that was follow the sport. But again, we will thank you for your service. Now that the Connecticut Rail goes back and forth quite easily between Windsor and Hartford, we'll make sure we get to Stanford, and we say hello, and we will always include you in the UConn family.
Thank you.
Like I said, this, you mentioned the family, maybe someone who occasionally disagreed with you on things. Occasionally. But it was all about his family. If anybody asked me about our chairman, I always said, this person has the utmost integrity, works his tail off. I remember through the contractors and president, I got an email at 3:15 in the morning. I was thinking about it a half hour later, but, I was waking up and going to bed. And when you, having been in a business where people sometimes disagree, it's how you disagree, the way you show it's the measure of a person. I would like to say to you that I've always respected your service, and particularly the awkward time that you were there. You had the pressure of being appointed by one governor, having an election, and doing a search for a president during that time period. And you went about it in your typical, methodical, ethical, logical way, and we ended up fine. I just want to say that I enjoyed working with you, and make sure I communicate in Stanford, so I can provide you.
Thank you. What I won't take away, Tom, is that somehow you and I always got there, didn't we?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Tom, I also want to thank you for your service and your commitment to the institution from day one. You always, you have put the institution first. And it was a lot to learn. It was a lot to sort of ramp up, and you really gave it your all. And you asked for support when you needed it. You're a humble man. You're an ethical man, and you've been a wonderful leader for the board, and I really thank you. And it was a difficult time. The search is the hardest thing that we can do. And so, thank you for your commitment and your appreciate all you've done.
Thank you, Sharon.
Tom, it's been an honor and a privilege having the opportunity to work with you and to see your incredible dedication and leadership. You've left this institution a much stronger place. Thanks again to you, to your family, and I look forward to our friendship continuing in the future. Thank you.
I know it will. Thank you, Phil.
And Tom, I'm not one of the veterans, haven't been with you for 8 or 10 or more years, but as a fairly newcomer, I want to say that the UConn family vibe was there from day one, and you took over for some very big shoes with Larry Q, and did it with grace, and did it with inclusion, and plenty of information along the way, and I want to also thank you for the short time that we've had together and everything that you've done. Thank you.
previous administration when you were nominated to the board. It was a great pleasure to work with you, Susan, and the rest of the board to really move Connecticut, move the state forward, and move UConn forward as the national premier university that it is. With that said, I look forward to continuing working with you and look forward to Huskies being the top as they always are. But thank you for your service.
Well, Paul, I know the governor's agenda and your agenda are much larger than just UConn, but I am so pleased at the public support that the governor has expressed for our president-designate. I know how important that's going to be to his success and how important his success is to the success of the university. So, Governor Wilmot, thank you so much for that support.
I haven't been around for a lengthy period of time, but the time that I have, I really appreciate your leadership and guidance. And I just want to say thank you for being here in court. I think a lot of other things have been said.
And I will say this about you, I appreciate what a thoughtful student trustee. Okay, now I'm too being embarrassed. So I will say thanks again to everybody. But call for a motion to adjourn. So moved. Second, thank you. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Aye. Motion adjourned. Thank you.
no, actually, that's not true because I saw it with the, well, I guess it's, but it's like New London County, right over in. It should be really interesting. What are you doing these days? Any particular area that you're focusing on? Yeah.
So you guys pick amongst yourselves who gets to start.
Let me know if you need anything. You put in a good word and I can do that for you. Thanks for coming out. Yeah, still banging me in the head.
Look at this. They get 15 altogether. Jerry gets 30. Jerry gets 30. Yeah, sure. The times are all here on the sides. Yeah, that works. All right.
It is 7 p.m., so in the interest of time, let us get started. Good evening. My name is Indrajit Chaube. I am Dean of College of Agriculture, Health and Natural Resources, and it is my distinct honor and pleasure to moderate the session of the panel discussion tonight on GMO 2.0, Science, Society, and the Future. I'm getting a lot of feedback here. Is the sound coming out okay?
That's coming good. It's good here.
Okay, good. So I want to start by thanking you, the audience, for taking time to come to the panel discussion and come to the forum tonight. And then I want to thank our panel members here. We have assembled a really distinguished group of internationally recognized experts who are going to talk about different aspects of GMO. I want to thank the sources of funding that make the panel discussion tonight possible. The funding is provided by David and Nancy Bull, Cooperative Extension Service Innovative Programming and Extension Award, Yukon Extension, Northeast Ag Enhancement, USDA Risk Management Agency, and KBOT Cooperative. The goal for the panel discussion tonight is to provide you, the audience, a science-based and unbiased information on GMOs and do the best we can as a scientific panel here to clarify any misinformation around them. The panel will present information in a non-scientific manner that is easy to understand for anyone who is not familiar with various jargons and nuances of the subject. And as a moderator, I will keep time. So a couple of really just two housekeeping rules here. On the panel discussion tonight, all viewpoints are welcome. We are not here to promote one side or other. Rather, our goal is to provide facts on all viewpoints. And then please hold all questions until the end of the presentations, and then we will open up the floor for any question that may be on your mind for any of the panel members. So with that, we will get started. Our first speaker is Dr. Paul Vincelli. Dr. Vincelli is an extension professor and provost distinguished service professor at the University of Kentucky. His work focuses on plant pathology, including management of diseases of turf grass and forest trees, molecular diagnostics, international agriculture, and sustainability of food systems, as well as outreach on risks and benefits of genetically engineered crops. Dr. Vincelli serves as the co-coordinator of the Southern Region Sustainable Agricultural Research and Extension Program. He earned his Master's of Science in Plant Pathology from Rutgers University and his PhD in Plant Pathology from Cornell University. He served as a botanist in the US Peace Corps, as a service member in Colombia and Nicaragua, and as a Fulbright scholar in Uruguay and Nicaragua. Dr. Vincelli.
We're already having technical problems. It's not going into the slideshow mode.
I don't know if this means I get extra time, or maybe I should start talking and use the time. So I will say it's a pleasure to be here. Connecticut is a great state, and I've been here before, but never to your campus. And oh, good. All right, so it's time to roll. So I'm going to try to use my 15 minutes wisely. First of all, I want to start with a list of all the private sector funding I've received to talk about or work on GMOs. That's the list. That's the list. So I'm here to speak from what I know as a scientist and not because somebody's paying me, although I know some very good people that work in this field that do get funded, and they're excellent scientists, and so, you know, I'll listen to anybody who has, you know, good science-based approach to the topic. On the left are the list of crops that are widely grown as genetically engineered organisms in the United States. On the right, so largely these are crops we don't eat directly, okay? On the right is a list of all the GMOs, or genetically engineered crops, that are horticultural, fruit and vegetable type crops. Those are rarely found in the supermarket, so when you walk in the supermarket aisle, you should know that really outside of these, you know, maybe some corn oil or soybean oil or something, there's nothing that would actually be a raw genetically engineered crop. All right, so these are some chromosomes from tomato, and the arrows, portions of chromosomes, I should say. Chromosome 10 and chromosome 7, and the arrows represent genes in those. And watch what happens here. There's this 24,000 letter portion that comes from chromosome 10 that goes into chromosome 7. And actually, look at chromosome 7 again, you see it breaks up that particular gene right there in this insertion, okay? Looks kind of maybe a little bit unsettling to see all that change taking place. That is actually what naturally led to the development of the plum tomato, which I enjoy very much. So I'm using this as an example to sort of normalize the fact that genetic change is something that's very normal and helpful and useful, however it comes about. Okay, so this isn't particularly clear, but on the right you can see rows of alfalfa, seedling alfalfa. On the left you cannot. The reason you can't see them on the left is because that crop is susceptible to this disease. And the breeders have been able to achieve a high level of resistance, as evidenced on the right. And all this is trying to show you is they did that with conventional breeding. So genetic engineering is not the only way to improve crops. Conventional breeding remains very, very important. Was the DNA modified? Of course, yes. To have heritable change, the DNA must become modified. So that's why most scientists prefer the term genetic engineering instead of genetic modification. It's just a more precise way. But we're talking about, I think, the same thing. All right, so to understand what genetic engineering is, forgive me if this is too simple-minded, but it helps people to understand that this analogy, which is peer-reviewed, by the way. So it's like using a word processor. So I'm of Italian descent. So let's say that I'm writing a cookbook on Italian cooking, and I like this sentence right here, and it's in this one of my files. Okay, with genetic engineering, I can copy that file, and I can insert it into another file, which we all do, and it's the sentence is a gene. And so with the older techniques, what are commonly called GMOs, the insertion occurs randomly. So we might get the sentence or the gene inserted in its full length, and it's actually active, but its insertion point we don't control. Okay? So there's that bit of randomness in the process. The technology called Crispr, which I don't have a slide, I left that slide out out of deference to my colleagues who may talk about this topic, but there are the latest techniques called Crispr techniques. Actually, you can control the insertion point as well. So this is a huge advance in biology. But anyway, I want you to see this is the basic concept of genetic engineering. Copy and paste or type it out with using Crispr. Okay, so this is a contrasting method of genetic change. This guy is working with a very dangerous chemical. He's protecting himself from this chemical. And what's he going to do with the chemical? He's going to paint on this chemical solution onto the silks of a flowering corn plant. And pollen is going to land naturally on that silk, and it will be exposed to this very powerful mutagen. And so that all these mutations are going to form in the surviving pollen grains. And so if there's fertilization, there's a lot of mutation that takes place. Uncontrolled, unknown mutation. And that's a conventional technique. That's a conventionally used technique. So this principle here is what I just used that to illustrate. One is that non-GMO breeding or conventional breeding is less precise, less controlled, and more disruptive than genetic engineering. This is not me talking. This is well established in the scientific literature. And that's okay. There's nothing harmful or wrong with using conventional breeding. They're all good. When we think about copying and pasting sentences, we know that that act does not introduce a new risk, and neither does the intrinsic, there's no intrinsic risk from copying and pasting genetics. So what scientific societies throughout the world have concluded is that genetic change, with respect to genetic change, what matters is not how the genetic change was made, but what the genetic change does. And again, I think my publication, I'll refer to that in a little bit. All right, this is a very effective form of communication. Very effective. It does not represent the prevailing scientific findings. And I invite you to see my publication. Wait, is it? Where is it? So that they know. Okay. All right. So there they are. And anyway, you can read for yourself. And if you think I've misinterpreted any of these distinguished scientific organizations, please let me know. But I don't think I have. So you can see for yourself that I'm just repeating what scientists throughout the world have concluded. Now, individual genetic traits might pose a risk, and that's also true for non-GMO conventional breeding. So there's no intrinsic mechanism of harm from genetic engineering. So genetic change, what matters is how I'm repeating this point because it's so important. What matters is not how the change was made, but what the genetic change does. Now, I don't want you to leave this session thinking that I'm a cheerleader for genetic engineering. I think there's significant benefits, but there are concerns. And the flow of genes that contain genes that you may not want flowing in pollen, that's a possible issue. We can talk more about that. Can you hit the arrow there and see if that helps? Okay, so we're stuck in.
We need another assistance.
So another concern I can talk about while we're waiting for this to be fixed is let's see, what did I put in? Transgene flow. Consolidation of the seed industry. That's a concern that a number of my friends share. One of the concerns is, through the massive revenues that certain seed companies, most notably Monsanto, before it now became Bayer, they've used those revenues to accumulate lots of smaller seed companies. So there's been a lot of consolidation of the seed industry. driven in part by revenues of GMOs. That's, you know, that's a legitimate concern. Okay. So there are legitimate concerns, and we spend a lot of time on those in my course, graduate course. We just don't have time in a 15-minute talk to talk a lot about those, but you might have questions. All right. Yeah, we just talked about that. Let's go through. Let me see if I can advance it. Yes. Okay, consolidation of the seed industry. Right. So I want to take the time that remains to talk about some examples of genetic engineering. How many people have heard of Roundup Ready crops? Okay. Roundup Ready is engineered resistance to Roundup herbicide. It's very useful technology, and it's not sustainable. It's very useful. Talk to a grower if you don't believe it, but it's not sustainable. And growers know, they never argue at that point, because they know that what happens is there's been selection for resistant weeds. So that's not the model. It's a complex topic, but it's not the model that I like to point out. Here's one that I think is pretty powerful. All right, so aflatoxin is produced by certain molds that are naturally occurring. It's one of the most potent carcinogens known, and it's natural, and I don't want it in my food. So here's the only data slide I chose to throw in there. So what they did was they used a gene silencing technique and inoculated the kernels in the center of these red dots, and then measured the aflatoxin content a few weeks later in the surrounding kernels. And here are the controls. Those are massive doses of aflatoxin, very bad. And here they zeroed it out with this engineered trait. They zeroed it out. I've never seen that in a study on aflatoxin. Now, will this hold up in the field? I don't know, but this is exciting, particularly because this could have benefits if it's accepted. First of all, if it works in the field consistently, and if it's accepted by people. You know, there are a lot of people in this world whose exposure to aflatoxin is much higher than ours. So this is a pretty good example of why scientists become excited about some of these technologies. In Bangladesh, brinjal or eggplant is a culturally important food, and they spray, I've read this over and over, it must be true, 70 or 80 times a growing season. Seems massive, but that's what they say they have to do. And with engineered resistance to insects, the borer, stem borer, they reduce that dramatically. So this is an example from here in the United States. It's not commercialized yet, but the disease on the top is bacterial spot, a major threat to tomato production. Here is the same variety engineered with a single gene from I don't know which kind of pepper, from pepper. Okay. And all that gene does is it recognizes the infection. Then the tomato plant uses its own defenses to defend itself. I like this because this is what they're doing now in Florida, and certainly Kentucky. They're using copper. Copper is bad for the environment, it's bad for the workers. It's a bad choice, but that's what people do because they don't have genetic resistance. All right, some examples from the developing world, world of developing economies. So bacterial wilt is a bacterial disease that colonizes, the pathogen of which colonizes the water conducting tissue, and you can see all the bleeding of the cells coming out in this cut surface, and so it causes wilt. And furthermore, it infects banana, and it causes rot. And they don't have a conventionally bred solution. They do have an engineered solution in Uganda, and it was developed largely by Ugandan scientists for Ugandan smallholders. So again, Ugandan scientists. So I think I brought it in under time, actually, but I do want to finish with this point, and that is that my thinking on this topic is that there is no umbrella GMO, and everyone is a different application in a plant for a particular need. So I think I guess I would appeal for considering each on a case-by-case basis. Thank you.
Dr. Vincelli, thank you so much for providing a nice overview of risk and benefits of genetically engineered crops. Our next original speaker, Dr. Robert Bird, he got sick with the flu and could not be with us here tonight. So Dr. Jerry Berkowitz will cover the topic that he was going to talk about in his presentation on ethical, legal, and social implications of GMOs in his presentation. So our next speaker is Dr. Yi Li, and Dr. Li is one of our own, professor in College of Agriculture, Health, and Natural Resources. He is a professor in the Department of Plant Sciences and Landscape Architecture. His research focuses on developing technologies to use CRISPR to efficiently and effectively produce transgene-free mutants for perennial crop plants, and particularly woody plants. Dr. Li develops highly efficient plant transformation methods for recalcitrant plant species and non-transgenic breeding varieties of turf grasses for low mowing frequency and environmental stress tolerance. He teaches undergraduate courses on plant breeding and biotechnology. Dr. Li earned his PhD in plant pathology and biochemistry from State University of New York in Syracuse. Please help me welcome Dr. Li to talk about CRISPR technologies.
Thank you, Dean, for the introduction. So I'm going to talk about some simple science for GMO technologies. First, I have nothing to do with Monsanto. And I do work with transgenic plants in the past, but now, more recently, if I do plant breeding, I do use traditional plant breeding technique more than anything else. So here, this slide shows you if you use GMO technique to breed a new cultivar, or in this case, to introduce a drought-resistant gene into a corn plant, as shown here. This plant is a high-yielding corn, but the plants can be drought-sensitive. So if we have weedy corn plant, they contain a gene which can make a corn drought tolerant, but itself, the yield is very low. So when we use GMO technology, we clone the gene from this weedy corn plant, and then we do a fusion, make a fusion gene and insert the drought-resistant gene into the high-yielding corn. And then we can have high-yielding but also drought-tolerant corn plant. If you look at the molecular level, you can see here is, if you have this drought-resistant gene here in this weedy corn, we can clone this gene, just this single gene out, and then make it construct plasmid, and then insert into the cultivated high-yielding corn. And then eventually we end up with high-yielding drought-resistant corn, but only have one single gene, in this case, inserted. This slide have a title here is that GMO are not monsters. Here how the GMO is made. Often we use agrobacterium host the TI plasmid. In the TI plasmid contain a foreign gene or GMO gene in there. We want to insert it into crop plants to improve crop plants. So we use this agrobacterium to infect crop plants, and then we can select for transgenic plants or GMO plants which contain the GMO genes in the case of the drought resistance. Now, if you look at nature, for instance, you drive on Road 32, you see those kind of structures. This is called crown gouge structures. Agrobacterium is a naturally occurring soil bacteria. They insert gene into many different plant species, including many trees. Here is what they have done is agriculture has inserted their tDNA or their gene into plants. So this is natural occurring transgenic plants. Recently, there's an article in PNAS published. It has been shown that in a cultivated sweet potato that contains the tDNA gene from agriculture. So this is a natural occurring transgenic plant potato, sweet potato. We have consumed this for thousands of years. So we have a lot of actually naturally occurring transgenic plants, and that was made. This was made by agriculture. Started from 1997. In this country or many other countries in the world, we have several major transgenic crop plants. For instance, transgenic herbicide-resistant soybean, cotton, and corn, which is BT corn. As you can see here, in the US, almost near 100% of these three major crops now are GMO or transgenic. If we have consumed GMO food since 1997, in the supermarket, 80% of the packed foods contain GMO ingredient, but most of us do not know because there is no labeling on those food products. So you cannot tell which one are transgenic or non-transgenic. But the experts estimate 80% of them contain GMO ingredient. Here is one of the impact of GMO BT, insect-resistant BT. As we have more and more transgenic insect-resistant corn plants, the chemical use, the pesticides use have been dropped drastically as shown here. There are many other positive impacts on the environment as well as to the farmers use transgenic crop plants. Here, this slide shows you at the DNA level what happened or what's the difference or similarity between the traditional breeding and GMO technique. Traditional breeding, if you have this drought-resistant wheat corn, as I showed you before, in the gene here, this is the gene. Now, if you have cultivated corn, high-yielding corn, in order to introduce this gene into this cultivated high-yielding corn, we have to do hybridization, cross. When you do cross, so you have 50% of DNA from wheat corn, 50% of DNA or gene from cultivated corn. Many of these genes here in the wheat corn will have detrimental effects on the cultivated corn. So you have to get rid of these yellow corner genes. So you have to use this to backcross with this cultivated corn. You have to do at least 5 generations, sometimes 10 generations, in order to get rid of most of the gene and to have only this gene left, or only a small number of genes left, including this drought-resistant gene, for instance. Now, transgenic technology, you go to get this gene directly from this wheat corn and put only this gene into the corn plants. So it's going to be much more efficient, precise, as Paul has explained. And it takes only 1 or 2 years. Here, traditional breeding is going to take at least 5 years, or sometimes can be 10 years. And sometimes when you do backcross, this gene can be lost. So you're back to the original. Here, this slide shows you that I prepared the traditional breeding and the gene editing slides, but I thought maybe I don't have enough time, so I deleted those ones. But right here, this slide shows you that the effectiveness and acceptance of those 3 major technologies. One is GMO here. I think it's the most powerful, most efficient, most effective, because they can introduce any genes from any organism or else you think is good for the crop plant. Well, traditional breeding technique, for instance, cannot do that. You only can introduce genes from the ones can be hybridized. As to the acceptance, because GMO has problems, the least acceptable by public. The traditional breeding technique has no problem, no issue at all. Now, the newly developed genome editing technology is somewhere in the middle. In US, we don't regulate the gene editing plants. However, gene editing technology only can work on genes already in the plants. So they are limited in terms of what type of genes they can use, what kind of phenotype or traits they can create. So the GMO is the most powerful, the most efficient technique so far for crop improvement. However, the technology do have some problems, such as gene flow, Paul has mentioned, for some GMO plants or some genes, and also public acceptance issues. Here, these slides show you that we have population increase as predicted in the future, and it is or has already happened in the past. And here's the crop land. At the same time, we experience reduction in the crop land. Therefore, I think we needed to use whatever the technology useful to improve the agricultural productivity. So I'm going to finish here. My conclusion is improve crop yield or to reduce impact on our environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. Our next speaker is Dr. Jerry Berkowitz. Dr. Berkowitz is going to make two presentations. One that was going to be made by Dr. Robert Berg on ethical, legal, and social implications of GMOs, and also cover his own topic on GMOs and big agriculture in the US. Dr. Berkowitz is a professor in the Department of Plant Science and Landscape Architecture here at UConn's College of Agriculture, Health and Natural Resources. His interests are in ion channels, pathogen response signaling, photosynthesis, and plant-water relations. Dr. Berkowitz has taught several courses here in our college that focus on biotechnology, agricultural technology and society, vegetable production, organic production, organic agriculture, plant-water relations, agriculture and the environment, and cannabis horticulture. He earned his Master's of Science in Crop Physiology from Texas Tech University and a PhD in Plant Physiology from Brandeis University. He has served as a program director in biology several times during his career at National Science Foundation. Please help me welcome Dr. Berkowitz.
Thank you, Dean. Thanks for the folks coming to share in the forum, and thank you to Stacy and our wonderful extension crew for putting the effort in to fund and arrange this. I'm here to provide a broader perspective on the technology that we just heard about. In fact, some might say that what I'm about to present is a bait and switch, because a lot of the information I'm going to provide to you tonight is not specifically about GMOs. I'm going to start out talking about or showing you a slide, an advertisement from a couple decades ago for DDT. Two reasons why I introduced this idea to you. Two. One is that in science, we seek truth and we present truth as we know it at the time based on the evidence that we have. And of course, the scientists who were promoting DDT a couple of decades ago didn't know the long-term effects of DDT. A second reason why I introduced this topic is because public, oftentimes, we all oftentimes conflate things. We mash things together. And when it comes to GMOs, a lot of times people are uncomfortable about one issue and then meld it together in other issues. So I think this slide has some relevance for us for both of those purposes. Can anyone remember why DDT was in fact banned? Was it particularly, what was wrong? Was it toxic?
Effects on wildlife.
So it was exactly, it wasn't particularly toxic. It had other effects that weren't recognized immediately, long-term effects on the ecosystem, because it persisted in the environment. Anything that you generate that's not a natural chemical typically has less microorganisms in the environment which are breaking it down. So in the case of DDT, it wasn't breaking down. Okay, now I switched my talk because in the last couple of weeks we heard a second remarkable lawsuit against Monsanto. I think it was March 27th, where a judgment of $80 million was given to a citizen who had claimed that Roundup caused cancer. Okay, so what's the story? What I tell students in my class is, if you have chlorophyll or if you're photosynthetic, then you need to worry about herbicides. Generally speaking, what herbicides are targeted to are biochemistries that are not present in animals, and that in fact is true. Certainly true with Roundup. Roundup blocks the shikimic acid pathway, which I showed you a slide of. The shikimic acid pathway generates the essential amino acids. They're essential in our diets because we don't make them, we have to eat them. Plants generate them. So Roundup is affecting a biochemical process that's not present in our bodies. So it's not particularly toxic. I want to show you here what's called an LD50. That's a way to evaluate relative toxicities. And if you look at Roundup or glyphosate, the higher the number, what LD50 means is the dose required to kill 50% of the people attending a lecture on GMOs. So the higher the number, the more it would take to kill half of y'all. So in any case, if you look at glyphosate, Roundup, the LD50 is higher than table salt. That's a perspective. It gives you relative toxicities. I also want to let you know that other herbicides like 2,4-D, which also affects a plant process, it affects plant hormone signaling. It is a plant hormone in a fashion. In any case, even a herbicide like 2,4-D is more toxic than Roundup. So what the heck is the public giving $80 million to a citizen who sues Monsanto for? That is an important question, and that is one of the targets of my talk time. March 27th, $80 million. Why? Well, the public has a certain perception of corporations, and in this case, from what I read and from what I understand, and in fact I went to a review, let's see, I went to, excuse me, I can't find the source of my information that I just prepared in the last couple of days regarding this lawsuit. But one thing that came out in the trial is that Monsanto had internal reports that they didn't share with the EPA when they got Roundup cleared. Now, we're not talking about GMOs here, but the public doesn't necessarily really even care about that point. We're talking about Roundup, and we're not talking about its toxicity. I'm learning myself as a scientist that toxicity is one thing, carcinogenicity is another thing, and I'm learning. So, in this court case, and in the previous one, the plaintiffs were suffering from non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and it's not that simple to parse out whether or not something is or is not carcinogenic. So it's the Clinical Neurology News that I got this information. And what the court decision was based on, from what I understand, is that Monsanto had some evidence regarding the potential carcinogenicity, of Roundup that they didn't include in the reports filed to get approval. Now, is it carcinogenic or is it not carcinogenic? That's not an easy question to dissect. If you go to the US EPA, the US EPA says, quote, Roundup is not likely to be carcinogenic. On the other hand, the UN's WHO, World Health Organization, has a International Agency for Research on Cancer. And the IARC looked at, did meta-studies, where they looked at many, many published studies, just like EPA did. And what the IARC from the UN concluded was that Roundup was probably carcinogenic to humans. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why the court ruled what they did, why the jury ruled what they did. But if you look under the hood at this, you'll see that this agency from the UN, the IARC, has evaluated nearly 1,000 compounds, and there are very, very few of them. You can count on one hand that were not labeled probably carcinogenic to humans. So you see what the issue is here. These are not simple ways to discern long-term health risks. Well, issues of when we have an agrochemical in our environment. So I just included that because this court case was just a couple of weeks ago. Okay, so some of the issues I think that I'm going to address is, why do we have 200 million acres of transgenic crops grown in the United States? And with all due respect to my colleagues, I think that there's no question that consumers looking for the least expensive food are what's driving the use of GMO crops. And the crops are really, we're talking about BT, of course, and Roundup resistance. Any kind of next generation technology for improving nutrition is really not what's on the table. Of the 170, 80 million acres of crops in the US that are GMOs, 95%, 99% are BT or express BT or Roundup resistance or both. So that's really the issue that I want to focus on. Now, one thing I want to share with you, as you heard from Dr. Lee, is that The technology is straightforward. You can use agrobacterium or what's called biolistics. But one thing that you need to do is not only transfer a gene that has a certain trait that you want to express in plants, but you also need to introduce a selectable marker, at least with the traditional technology. And maybe, in fact, Dr. Lee's doing some world-class research that might avoid that in CRISPR. But for the vast majority of crops on the market now, they used a selectable marker, and the selectable marker that they used was antibiotic resistance. They used antibiotic resistance because they could put antibiotic in the petri dish when they're looking for positive transformants. They can select on the antibiotic. Now, what the technologists did in the first generation of transgenic crops was put the selectable marker gene and the transgene of interest, Roundup resistance, BT, under the same promoter. And that promoter was a constitutive promoter that would express both genes in all cells of the plant through the entire life of the plant, rather than taking two promoters and putting one promoter, putting the antibiotic resistant gene under a constitutive promoter expressed only in the petri dish and not in the plant. Why didn't they go back and re-engineer the construct? It's because none of you folks were sitting on the board as a public advisory panel, in my opinion. And I think that the public should have knowledge and should share in these discussions. Do you see my point? Okay, we heard from Dr. Lee that, in fact, our transgenic technology is reducing pesticide use. That's certainly true. And if you look at agrochemicals altogether, this is a fairly old study. I don't think it's changed a whole lot. But basically, you have a decrease of pesticide use due to BT expressed transgenic crops, but you have an increase in herbicide use. And by the way, herbicides replace labor. Labor is one of the most expensive things in agriculture. So there you have it. Organic farmers don't use herbicides, they cultivate. But nonetheless, the price of food is of course affected by the costs, and without question, Roundup reduces the cost because it reduces labor. But the net is an increase in chemical use when you're looking at transgenic crops. That's from what I found. We also heard tonight that the increasing population is driving a demand for increase in food. In this study by the director of the California Academy of Sciences, the title, Changing the Global Food Narrative, this paper points out a couple of things that are fairly relevant. Number one, population increase is not driving the increase in demand for food on this planet. It's the increase in use of meat in India and China in particular. Certainly in the United States, we have a very high proportion of calories for meat, and meat requires a whole lot more land than vegetarian diets. So one thing that this fellow pointed out is that it's really not an increase in population, but changing diets that's a big driver of increased food production. And let's see. And really, the technologies that have been already commercialized regarding GMOs are not really giving us more food or better food, but cheaper food. I think that's fairly straightforward. Okay, So this is a heck of a picture. What this picture is the protein, a three-dimensional construct of the protein in the gut of the larva of Lepidoptera and Coleoptera insects, caterpillars. And this protein is the receptor for Bt. And we don't have this gene, we don't have this protein in our guts. Insects do. Now this gene, this is the protein that is the receptor for the Bt toxin. Now, what do you know about genes and evolution? Genes mutate. So anything that's, and generally this is true with pesticides, any kind of physical pesticide like diatomaceous earth that physically assaults an insect is much more effective and stays effective and doesn't get resistance as quickly as an agrochemical. So now, Bt. We didn't hear it tonight, but Bt is a certified organic pesticide. It's used by organic growers. Many people in the GMO business will say, we're using something used by organic farmers, and that in fact is true. But this is the number of species that have become resistant to Bt, plotted along with transgenic crop production in the United States. There's no question that use of Bt in transgenic crops will increase the rate, has increased the rate at which insects become resistant to Bt. Anyone who's a certified organic grower here knows that when you apply a pesticide, even an organic pesticide, that you're applying it on a weekly spray schedule. We heard, certainly in the case of some in India, or it was in Pakistan, and eggplants, you apply very frequently, but generally speaking, an organic farmer's spraying Bt only when needed. Is that going to create a different selective pressure than having 100 million acres of Bt expressing crops where the Bt gene is expressed in all cells throughout the life cycle of the plant? There's no question that there's a big difference. And what I'm pointing out to you is that it's not just a human health issue. It's not a human health issue regarding GMOs. That's a no-brainer. As we've already learned tonight, there's no question that the evidence for human health risks is virtually zero when it comes to GMOs. But when we look at the broader perspective, we've got some issues. So the broader perspective, I looked up for this talk and got a map, I'll show you soon, of the Mississippi River Basin and how many municipalities have unacceptable above federal limits of nitrate in the water supplies. Something like 25% of all municipalities in the major belt of our country have problems with nitrate. Nitrate has nothing to do with GMOs, in fact, if anything, but it's fertilizer, of course, and it's used as part of our agricultural productivity. And this last summer, we read an awful lot about red tide in Florida. There's no question that phosphorus fertilizer, used by the sugarcane industry in Florida, by the way, tremendously, is what's contributing to red tide outbreaks. Now, who pays for the cleanup of the municipality water supplies? Who's paying for red tide remediation? We don't, in our food dollars. The Army Corps of Engineers is working on the Everglades to deal with phosphorus. We don't pay a tax, we don't pay for the price of food with regards to these larger global issues of how agriculture works in our country. here's the map that I found, and these are municipalities with above federal limit nitrate levels, and it's clearly due to agriculture. That's the Corn Belt, and this is again from the National. Well, this is from the National Geographic. I'm not sure how much time I have. I'm going to get to food labeling soon. I'm fine? Okay. But I want to leave you regarding the issue of big agriculture, not with issues regarding GMOs, but consider this. 80% of the carrots we eat in this country are grown on 2 farms and processed in 1 plant. Okay, what does that mean? And are consumers interested in an alternative? I'm very excited and happy to see in Connecticut we have a tremendous increase over the last decade in interest in local food. And we, as college and our extension people, our scientists, are really, really doing a great job, I think, in providing a kind of rebirth of tremendous interest in local food. It's not just conventional agriculture. This here is earthbound organic farms. Just think about it. Baby greens. You can go to the store's farmer's market and buy baby greens bags for $5 a bag. You can also go to the supermarket and get earthbound baby greens a lot cheaper. This one harvester collects 10,000 pounds of greens an hour with a crew of 12. So I think that when it comes to GMOs, the question isn't about human health risks. It isn't about the technology, but rather, where is our food coming from? And a lot of, I think, citizens ask, I would like to have the right to know where I'm investing my food dollars. And therefore, 80% of the public is interested in labeling. I don't know if in labeling of GMOs. I don't know if anyone else did, but I read the discussion and debate that occurred in the Senate Agriculture Committee when the GMO labeling law was passed. And the Grocery Manufacturers Association was presenting, Grocery Manufacturers Association, essentially Coke, Pepsi, essentially big agriculture. They were presenting why we shouldn't have GMO labeling. And this is a picture of the audience during that session in the Senate chambers. There's no question that a lot of people in this country are interested in having GMOs labeled. And the arguments by the Grocery Manufacturers Association against labeling of GMOs were because, one, it might increase the cost. And I don't know. No one really knows. I haven't seen a good study about how much it will increase the cost. How am I doing? 5 minutes? Okay. A second thing they said is that people will misunderstand GMO technology. You are not, the public shouldn't be allowed to have the information to make decisions. And I think that's, that's really not a good argument. And then thirdly, they said, hey, you've got organic agriculture. You can already get non-GMO food. Why bother us? So those kind of attitudes, I think, really create a problem in the public's eye. Okay, so I'm running out of time, but I want you to know that Connecticut was one of the first states, or was the first state in the entire country that passed GMO labeling laws. Never mind about that. Again, last year, the federal government passed labeling laws. Now, I went to the USDA website a week or two ago, the USDA website, and looked up the labeling laws, and the language on their website said, retail food products, wait, where is it? Here, there it is, the second sentence. It says, you will see words, a symbol, scannable links, text instructions, or in some cases, phone numbers or web addresses that convey the information. So that's what was on the website. So I emailed, didn't get a response. I called them, and they told me I will get a response sometime after May 1st. But I asked them, does that sentence mean that that symbol is going to be on the food? Or is that going to be on the food? And the USDA couldn't answer me, and they're checking it out, and they'll get back. But what I want to share with you is that the federal law that was passed for GMO labeling is probably going to allow that, so that you have to scan the product with your phone and go to a website and then look up the food. And I don't think that's what people, the 80% of the population who are in favor of GMO labeling, were really looking for. And the federal laws supersede all of our state laws. So the Connecticut law goes out the window. I think I'm going to end with that. I've got some more information about food labeling in this country, food labeling laws. But I think I've shared with you a broader perspective. I haven't really talked too much about GMOs, but the broader perspective of the idea of people being concerned about how their food is made, where it comes from, and how they invest their food dollars. Thank you very much.
Before we open the floor for questions, I want to invite Dr. Paul Vincelli. You can summarize the discussions from both sides of the arguments that we heard this evening.
Sure, okay, thanks. Is this on? Can you hear me now? Sure. How about now? Testing 1, 2, 3, there it is, okay. So I guess I made several points. Used a word processing analogy for genetic engineering. Made the point that genetic engineering did not create an intrinsic food safety risk according to modern science. Genetic engineering is less disruptive than conventional breeding. I think Dr. Lee made the same point. It can be used to improve food safety. I used the example of aflatoxin to illustrate that. And it can be used to reduce pesticide use. And that these should be considered on a case-by-case basis. He made a number of points. His slides and his comments talked about precise and efficient genetic change, powerful technique, referring to genetic engineering, more expensive for deregulation, issues of public acceptability, and possible gene flow. He explained the concept of genetic engineering using drought tolerance and how genes are inserted by the natural bacterium, Agrobacterium tumefaciens. Let's see, I don't know if you mentioned the sweet potato. Yeah, you did. Yeah. So sweet potato as an example of a natural GMO, and illustrated several cases of applications, including virus-resistant papaya, golden rice for vitamin A, Arctic apple for reducing browning of apples, and BT cotton as a way to reduce insecticide use. He showed how BT corn has led to substantial reductions in insecticide use. He explained the impacts of hybridization versus genetic engineering, how there was more genetic impact with hybridization. He brought up the seesaw between acceptance and effectiveness, public acceptance and effectiveness. and made the point that improving crop yields reduces the impact of farming on natural resources. And then Dr. Berkowitz, let's see, okay. So he first of all started by reminding us that scientists seek the truth based on what we know at the time, that we make a decision, how there was conflation of issues under the GMO umbrella sometimes, how glyphosate's LD50 or acute toxicity value is actually indicates it's more safe on that measure than table salt. But then also brought up the discussion about the $80 million lawsuit against Monsanto, or judgment, I guess.
Yeah, judgment.
Right. Based in part on hiding information on safety questions relating to Roundup. And then contrasted EPA's judgment about glyphosate and cancer versus IARC, International something.
Agency for Research on Cancer, UN umbrella organization.
Right. They considered that a probably human carcinogen, but that most of the chemicals that IARC had reviewed had concluded were probable human carcinogens, sort of muddy in the water. Consumers wanting, he made a comment about consumers wanting cheap food, and that drives the $200 million acres of GMOs. Okay. The technology itself is straightforward. He talked about how there is in most of the traits being used, genetically engineered traits being used, there is a selectable marker for antibiotic resistance. He stated the principle that the public should have knowledge and share in these discussions with respect to food technologies. Is that
Yes, yes, thank you, Paul.
Okay. And looking for affirmation, I want to make sure I'm representing Dr. Berkowitz properly. Let's see. Decreased genetic engineering has led to decreases in insecticide use, but increased use of herbicides. Increased food demand globally is being driven by changing diets, and brought up the point that the insect resistance trait that called BT, which is an engineered trait, has led to reductions in insecticide use, but has increased selection pressure towards resistance in insect pests that were once susceptible. Let's see, I think he used the word no-brainer on food safety.
Right.
Yeah, which I was glad to hear. Thank you for that. And the nitrate pollution of waterways, he brought up who pays for that, what is the true cost of our agricultural system was another question he raised. And closed here with advocating for labeling of GMOs.
Thank you, Paul.
Well,
Thank you for providing the summary. We open up the floor for questions. We have got 2 student volunteers who will bring the microphone. So please wait until the microphone comes to you. And while they are getting ready, I will ask the first question. You gave several examples of using genetically engineered technology to promote desirable traits. Are there some examples where it has been used successfully to suppress undesirable traits also?
suppress undesirable traits.
Yeah.
Well, for example, like the aflatoxin case, I'm trying to think of.
In some case when this variety of rice was growing too tall and could not bear the weight of the paddy itself and will lodge, and then technology was used to make the variety shorter. So are there some other examples like that where an undesirable trait in the crop is knocked out?
Cindy.
Can I answer the question?
Sure.
Okay. So basically, I don't know about plant science. I'm an animal scientist. So definitely in the animal world, we make transgenic or genetically modified animals as well. And one of the major reasons is to produce disease-resistant animals. For example, we have all heard of the mad cow disease, right? And there's a gene in the cow's brain that's transformed, basically making the cows having uncontrollable movements. So basically, in order to get rid of the mad cow disease, which is an undesirable trait, and then you have to knock that gene out by disrupting it. So basically, you make a transgenic animal to get rid of the mad cow disease, and those animals have been created.
Good, thank you.
Can I add to that?
Sure, sure.
Thanks for helping out with that question. That was very helpful because I'm a pathologist, and so immediately now the wheels are turning. I understand your question. So there are genes in plants called susceptibility genes, and they may have more than value to the plant than just making them susceptible to certain diseases, but they do confer susceptibility. So if you go in and mutate those genes with very modest changes using CRISPR, you can engineer plants that are that have extremely minimal genetic change, but that are resistant to particular diseases.
Thank you. Questions from the audience, please. Right there.
Hi, my question is for Professor Berkowitz. You brought up many concerns that you have about modern agriculture, things like water quality impacts, various other things, many of which are indeed legitimate issues, but many of which are not related to genetic engineering per se. So my question then is, why make genetic engineering the litmus test? Why focus on that plant breeding tool as opposed to addressing some of the other issues more head on?
Rather, it's a great question. I think that question, I applaud you for asking that question. My last slide, my conclusion slide, which I didn't get to, said, is GMO technology any better or worse than many of the other technologies that we employ in agriculture? I venture and pro-offer to this audience, no, not necessarily worse, but it's another technology. And I think that it should be looked at in the context more than just a human health context. So I applaud you. I think your point is very important for all of us to remember that there's a lot of issues in use of technology and the environment. GMOs is one of them. I don't know if anyone in this room knows, but does anyone know what the impact of corn stover, millions of acres of corn leaf tissue with BT in it, on insects in lakes and in a stream? I don't know. I haven't looked at any published studies, but that's a question. So I'm absolutely ceding to you that I think that it's important to realize that you shouldn't put GMOs technology on some kind of stake and skewer it. But I'm presenting, well, let's look at the broader picture of how we go about our business in this country. Does that provide you with an answer? Okay.
Can I add quick comments to Jerry's comments on that? The BT corn, if you look at the literature, back many years ago, there was a Nature publication from Cornell, shows that BT pollen harm monarch butterfly. And that's what is similar to Jerry just comment. As Jerry has mentioned in his talk, the BT protein is very specific to a narrow range of insect. A lot of insects don't have that receptor proteins. And later, in fact, at the Nature paper, followed by a lot of studies in many laboratories for many years, all shows that the BT pollen does not have significant harmful impact on the other insects.
I'm
And
talking
that's,
about the leaves.
Yes,
the
but
tissue.
not also, as in case has been shown, there is also another paper, PNS, published for the impact of corn, roots, all those things. And then that paper was published again many years ago. Later has been criticized, and also the other publications, more than one, quite a few, demonstrated that's not the case. So far, I do not think that there is solid evidence to show that the BT corn plants has a massive, non-specific effect. However, a lot of things we don't know, so we still have to keep our mind open. If something happens, we know something bad, then I think it can be taken care of. But so far, I think the scientific community has not found solid evidence.
I don't know.
Back there.
This question is for all members of the panel. It's mostly to take a look at and to see what your opinion on a certain thought for the industry is, particularly with labeling. So in terms of labeling, I can see two different types of doing it. Labeling that a produce has had genetic engineering, and then labeling particularly what kind of genetic engineering. The reason I make this distinction is because our first speaker talked about looking at GMOs as a case-by-case situation, and if we're going to do that, then you need to know the type of genetic engineering on produce. However, that's also a lot more expensive than just labeling a product as using genetic engineering. Out of these two options, which one do each of you prefer?
Oh, you're waiting for an answer. I was waiting for the microphone to come back, and I was going to use that time to think about an answer, but I guess I'm on the spot. No, I'm actually grabbing the microphone. Well, I think the most important thing that I could say is that I'm in favor of the labeling of genetically engineered foods, not for scientific reasons, but for social reasons. I think that there's enough concern in the possibility of effects, and my experience in doing outreach is that there is usually the number one issue is food safety, which is why I emphasize it in my own comments. But you know, that's where people are, and they come by it honestly, and people want safe food. You know, I do too. All scientists want safe food, and we don't want to go to bed thinking we're causing harm, you know, or overlooking harm. So I'm in favor of labeling for the social reasons, so people have the confidence in their food supply that I have in my own. But to get to your specific question, you know, I'm not sure I have a good answer for it, because I do think there is value. In a perfect world, we would all know the difference between targeting mutations done by CRISPR versus mutation breeding versus transformation, which was talked about. And we would label it accordingly. But for most people, that's much too much. And so I don't have a good answer for you. I think it's a great question.
I always support labeling, in addition to scientific reason, or as well as social reason. But a personal reason, I prefer to eat GMO food myself. So whenever if I see GMO labeling, I'm probably going to prefer to buy those ones than the non-GMO ones, because I do think GMO in general is safer than conventional, particularly if you deal with leafy vegetables. It's much safer than organic ones. That's my personal opinion. So I strongly support labeling because I prefer to eat a GMO.
I support labeling simply because the public is interested in labeling. And I don't feel that I, as an academic, as a scholar, as a scientist, should tell the public why, you know, should turn my back on the public. The public vastly in support of labeling. I absolutely do not think that GMO crops should be labeled based on the specific gene. By the way, BT, there's enough toxicity studies again done on, so the EPA is going to look at, and lots of other agencies are going to look at the specific genes. But I believe that most people who shop at organic food stores and not preferring GMO foods are doing so because of the issue of a technology in general, not the specific genes. So that's the way I feel. I don't think at all that specific genes should be labeled.
Okay, there is a question right there.
Hi, I just have a couple of comments. First, that is, BT is a naturally occurring soil bacterium. It's everywhere. So, first of all, it's with us all the time. Second, the question that was just asked about the various technologies, I think is a very important one, because you can't combine transgenic processes with CRISPR. As I understand it, CRISPR only edits genes. It does not insert genes from a different organism. And that's a very important issue. And I don't think the general public understands the differences between these. If you're putting a horse gene in my corn, I sure want to know about it. But if you're just editing what's already in that corn, that's a big difference.
I'd like to respond. I think that's a great way of framing it. CRISPR technologies can be used to edit in genetic sequences that were not there. So it is possible to use CRISPR for more than just the targeted, very minor edits of what's there. It can include insertion of genes or deletion of long fragments of genes.
We go back there and then, yeah.
This week's New Yorker had an article on conspiracy theories, and I don't want this to be put into that context exactly, but I have a couple of comments. One is Dr. Berkowitz said scientists didn't know at the time, talking about DDT, and has all the members of the panel seem to be setting up scientists as some type of almost super being. And there are many examples today of leading scientists who have done suspicious things and have even been published in reputable journals, and then later found that maybe they faked data and so forth. And I just think it's important to, perhaps the members of the panel can comment on the limitation of scientists as human beings. And my other comment I make as a computer scientist, and it hasn't been brought up, and that is the idea of unintended consequences. When so many rapid changes are made in nature, not waiting 5 or 10 years as was discussed for traditional techniques of modifying genes, but in 1 year you change this, you change this, you change this. There are so many changes that it seems that unintended consequences are inevitable, and we don't know what they are. That scientists just continue to make these changes, and now with CRISPR they can make more and more changes and think that you're making wonderful things happen. But we don't know what the consequences of these things will be, especially when so many of them are being made all at once.
I'd like to jump in and provide a first response to that. Dr. Lee, in his presentation, didn't really shine a whole lot of light on it, but he mentioned that conventional breeding technologies can do all sorts of, have all sorts of unintended changes in a genome. And what I want to point out to you is Dr. Lee broached on this topic, but I think it's extremely important context, and that's risk assessment. When we're looking at GMO technologies, we have to look at them and weigh the risks against the alternative technologies. So I think to answer your question, I think you really have to look at risk assessment, and you have to look at relative risk assessment. And I think in that kind of context, GMO technology can provide a lot of positives. So even though you could have unintended consequences, when you look at the technology used to breed wheat before before conventional breeding, there's lots of insertions in any case. I'll leave it there. Mike wants to make a comment maybe.
I guess I would like to follow up with Steve's point, because I'm concerned about the time span of the unintended consequences. And as an example, I think what we're like, look at human health. We developed antibiotics to actually save people's lives. We've overused them now in this century so much that we're running into a point where antibiotics won't work for us. And we could have a global, health crisis on antibiotics because of our own intent, because of the very good science and good intentions that came out of that. If we do this kind of technology, don't we also run the risk with the insect world or some other kind of pest of creating the same kind of pandemic in the pest world of like, okay, we didn't anticipate that these insects would be able to come back in this different form 100 years from now. We just keep seeming to, it's like this giant mousetrap that we just keep adding another piece to it over and over and over. And we believe that we're going to technology our way out of these problems when, most of the problems are self-initiated because we changed one thing and now we have to change something else to fix the last problem, And, the time spans just don't seem to match up with how nature evolves versus how we're evolving nature very quickly. And I'd like to hear your comments on just the time spans necessary to look at these things. Is 10 years enough time? It seems like it's a long time to us, but nature didn't evolve in 10 years increments, really, right? It's hundreds and eons of years.
I can give some of my thoughts. First of all, if you look at the phyto level, when the commercial companies try to deregulate their transgenic plants or GMO plants, there is certain consensus. That is, if your trait or gene are from plants, or plants already have such a trait in other type of plants, then it's much easier. Now, if you try to put a gene from bacteria or from animal, put in the plants, then you're going to have a lot of difficulties to pass the deregulation process. If you look what types of GMO plants has been deregulated, the number of these plants are very small. Number of genes has been deregulated, or also very small. Now back to this BT issue now. As I said earlier, massive use of this, so far we have not seen big problem yet, but that doesn't mean we will not see problem. So that's maybe time is too short, only 20 years so far, massively used BT corn. But BT bacteria has been used traditionally for 70 years in organic agriculture. For 70 years, started from France and then in the US, so still widely used. So what's the impact of BT transgenic plants versus traditional use BT bacteria? What's the difference there? We're still not sure. Now, other things like herbicide resistant, those ones, the nature, those most of genes are from plants anyway. You do not see any gene, GMO plants contains animal genes. None of these can be deregulated. That's what, as far as I know. So we can, in the laboratory, you can do a lot of crazy things, but you're not be able to deregulate those crop plants. So I think at the federal level or community, scientific community, they are careful. Since we can do a lot of things, GMO technology is very powerful, but we have to be very careful. I think that's right. That the gentleman point out.
There is a question back there, and then we'll come back here.
So in traditional agriculture, to my knowledge, when we're dealing with insecticides and herbicides, there's an importance to rotating chemicals, to beginning with the least toxic, working your way up until you achieve an appropriate level of control. What I'm hearing is that we have two types of genetically modified plants, and I didn't even know about the animals, but plants that are very, very widely used here in our country. And what I'm not hearing is anything about rotating or about combining these genetically modified organisms and the control that they provide with other types of herbicides and insecticides to provide an appropriate level of control. To my knowledge, that's how you avoid these superbugs, the resistance. So what are we doing? Is there research? Are there best practices when using the BT corn or when using the Roundup Ready seeds to make sure that we are avoiding resistance? Is there anything going on there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'd like to answer that.
Go ahead.
It looks like you were poised.
Go ahead.
All right, thanks. So yeah, I think the Roundup Ready herbicide tolerance traits have been, were deployed without very much attention at all to the possibility of resistant weeds. And I think the fingers by academic colleagues have usually been pointing at Monsanto in that regard. But weed scientists seem to now be stressing integrated management approaches for the very problem that you've identified. With respect to the BT insect tolerance, insect resistance traits that have been widely used, I'm going to give you the answer that I give when I talk about plant pathology. I think it applies to diseases to insects as well. I think there are two strategies for addressing the very risk of the buildup of resistant diseases. One is integrated pest management, more reliance on integrated pest management. That's the foundation. And the second is more reliance on genetics. So in a perfect world, we would have a system that allows for the rapid deployment of new engineered traits. And so let's say in the case of a corn breeding program, you use a particular set of 3 genetic traits that are engineered to be on the same, to migrate together to move as a Mendelian character, is the best way I can say it. And they all operate in a different way, so they're attacking the insect or the disease in a different way. And then 5 years later, you rotate another 3 into the breeding program. You just keep doing this because there are many, many genetic resources we can rely on, and you could probably even rotate back to the first set after a few cycles away from it. So I do think the solution to that risk is integrated pest management and deploying resistance more wisely. As a plant pathologist, I can tell, the one thing I can say with absolute confidence for 35 years in working in plant pathology is there is no easy answer to fungicide use except genetics, and that includes conventional, but conventional breeding has not been enough. We're not there yet.
I also know that there are different forms of BT toxin proteins. So the companies that try to rotate to use them or use 2 to 3 different types so that to avoid or reduce insect resistance, in addition to what Paul has pointed out, or rather to create a refugee area so that to let some of the area do not just plant regular corn, for instance, so insects can hatch there, can do more grow normally there, so that to avoid the development of resistance. There are a lot of approaches, strategy has been used because industry do realize that problem. If you use one thing for a long time, you're going to have resistance. So that's, I think, I've been taken care of to some extent.
We had a public forum some years ago in this college where we had Monsanto here with us. I don't know if anyone else remembers, but I asked the scientists from Monsanto about the issue that Dr. Lee just brought up, and the scientist said, we're stacking BT genes. There's, what, 7, 9 different variants, but they're variants. And stacking isn't necessarily going to, it'll delay, but it's not going to prevent resistance. I think one of the questioners asked, what's up with this issue of pesticides? And I think we have to realize that we're living in an pesticide era. Before World War II, there were no pesticides. Our agriculture relied, is that incorrect?
I would say yes. People have been using pesticides for ages.
Well, synthetic,
Sure.
Let me clarify that. I'm talking about synthetic pesticides that are not natural in the environment. I would say since World War II is really the era of synthetic, well, arsenic is natural. I'm talking about synthetic pesticides. And I think that we're living in an era with a fixed timeline. I think there's, whether it's a couple of decades or longer, we're going to end an era where synthetic pesticides are effective. So I think it's inevitable. And by the way, someone brought up rotations and, of course, IPM, taking an integrated approach. All of these things are great alternatives that are going to make our environment and our crops healthier. There's no question. I believe that, certainly. So, an integrated approach and reliance on one technology leaves us in a vulnerable position.
There was a question right here.
I just wonder if these questions are being, if the information is being taught in schools so that as we go ahead, we can address this question, the general public can address this question in a more intelligent way.
Is Jen Cushman, do you want to answer that?
So it is something that within UConn we are beginning to develop a secondary genetic engineering curriculum that can be applied within secondary school teachers, as well as informal lessons that can be used with 7 to 18-year-olds in informal settings.
In a couple of weeks, I'm going to run what we call Camp DNA at our college, and I get a dozen high school teachers in, and I provide them with tools and resources and support so they can go back to their schools and replace boring lessons and labs on genetics with experiential things. And I also was funded by the government to put a website for high school for teachers, www.biologyteacher.uconn.edu. It's got lesson plans, and I do think that's a really important point you brought up.
I'd like to add one point addressing the education part question. So in UConn, at the undergrad level, there are 2 courses, at least that I know of, that talk about genetically modified animals and crops. I teach the genetic animal part, and I do a lot of genetic engineered plants. And Dr. Wang has another class that teaches also genetic engineering, and many different aspects of genetic engineering. And at the UConn GMO group, we're discussing developing a gen ed class at the university level, basically titled Everyday Biotechnology. So basically including many different forms of biotechnology that people are going to live with in the next 20, 50 years.
There is a question there.
So before I address my question about food waste, which is a topic we didn't necessarily get to, I just want to say the USDA, I just looked it up, says that we raise around 30 to 40% of the food in this country. And on top of that, the UN estimates it's about 35% in the world. And of that, 80% of the food waste comes from developed nations. So we can look at that socially, economically, and politically, but oftentimes it seems to come from the conventional food system. Is that because conventional crops tend to be cheaper, people have more disposable incomes in developed nations, and they can get rid of their food and dispose of it? Because we waste 133 billion pounds of food at the consumer level. And we have a significant food shortage in the world. Roughly 840 million people are starving every day. What can GMO crops do to fix that, if anything? And what can we do as a society to work towards doing something better?
I think the issue of transportation and accessibility confound the very real point you brought up. Without food, I don't know, certainly don't know answers about food waste. But the little I do know, I think the problem is in areas where there's great need, distribution is an issue. That confounds an answer. But that's not, of course, the only answer. The answer is lots of food waste and how to deal with it. I applaud you.
Yeah, I just follow up on what Jerry has said. I agree. It's a very important issue, and it's a complex issue. It really is quite complex and multifactorial and all that. But yeah, we do a lot of food waste in this country, and my wife and I are very aware of that and try to minimize our part. I think it is the bigger answer is awareness and behaviors and so on. To address the problem. There are ways in which, since you asked, genetic engineering could contribute around the margins. You know, there are real particular disease problems that occur in transit and in storage, you know, and brown rot of stone fruits, for example, cherries, you know, can rot very commonly from a particular fungus. So could we engineer cherries to not be susceptible to brown rot? That would be wonderful because of the pesticide use and the food waste issues. So I think there are ways that we could sort of attack some of the causes through genetic engineering, but I'm not going to suggest that genetic engineering is going to, you know, it's not going to shine from the heavens and give us the answer. I think it's a much bigger issue, and it's an important one. So thanks for bringing it up.
My role here is to moderate and request questions from the audience, but I feel like I need to provide my input on this too. It's such a complex issue, and so I'll tell you very briefly what my wife and I used to do and now what we do. It's a behavior change. We used to go and do grocery shopping, thinking about we were going to use things that we were buying. Lots of things will go from grocery cart to the refrigerator to the trash can. It has been many years now that we have adopted that we do not buy anything for which we do not have a firm plan. Does not matter how tempting it looks in the grocery store. It does not get into our grocery cart or grocery bag if we do not have a plan for that. And that has made a tremendous impact on food waste in our own household. Thank you for asking that question. Other questions? Right here.
Thank you. So my general sense from the presentations was that the potential of biotechnology and genetic engineering research was really, like, there was a heavy emphasis on that, and I think there's like a ton of potential for what we can do with biotechnology overall. Personally, for me and the community of people I know who have concern about GMO, it tends to mostly stem from like the effects of pesticides and herbicides, which it sounds like there's a general consensus that that stuff is not sustainable and it's not going to last. But for example, with glyphosate, it was originally created by a Japanese scientist around the World War II era, and it was shelved after that because he realized that this is water soluble, and unlike fat soluble herbicides and pesticides, water soluble herbicides can pass through, say, like the brain barrier. I forgot what it's called. But because of that, it can actually create, it can disrupt the nervous system, and it's been shown to cause intercellular isolation, like in the gut, which has been leading to leaky gut in humans and causing gastrointestinal issues. They've been seeing a huge rise in this since the 1970s when glyphosate first entered the market, and people started spraying it. It was actually not so much the farmers as it was people spraying it all over their lawns that was causing this issue. So I think probably the public, we're more concerned about, like, I don't have any concern about so much GMOs in general as like the ramifications of pesticides and herbicides. And I think making those sort of distinctions is important for allowing GMO research to continue, but also like promoting human safety.
So if you don't mind, I'm going to jump in. I'm a plant pathologist, Mike. I cut my teeth, so to speak, studying pesticides. I've worked with pesticides for 35 years. And I'm totally with you. I think the distinction between genetic engineering or GMOs and pesticides is huge. I've not made much progress. I don't know if I've made any progress in reducing pesticide use for disease control, to be honest with you. But I do know that if growers have resistant crops, they tend to not want to spray the chemicals. So I think genetics in all its... No, I think I'm agreeing with you that there are... Yeah.
When the pesticides are like in the crops and then birds consume that, they've been showing that it has reproductive issues with some birds.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page. I'm not at all in favor of pesticide use. I work with them, but that doesn't mean I like them. I think it's important to know how they work in Kentucky or Connecticut, to study them in their, and find out what they do and don't do, and what the consequences are of using those. So I'm in agreement with you. What I'm saying is that reducing pesticide use as a plant pathologist is very hard without genetic solutions. I don't know what the solutions are, really.
Can I comment on that?
Yeah.
We usually don't talk about the Dust Bowl when we talk about GMOs, but really the search for genetic solutions to why we had soil failure sort of came after that, because we saw that our organic crops for some reason weren't yielding anymore, and they were depleting the soil. And so we assumed that they were just weaker. And yes, they're not necessarily as good as like genetically modified crops, but what they found is really it's the microbiome that was allowing organic plants to be really strong and turn out really high yields. And so I guess some doctors are suggesting maybe returning to traditional, like sustainable crop rotation and those sort of practices actually has a benefit for raising up the microbiome in the soil, which in turn leads to greater plant health, which reduces the amount of herbicide and pesticide use we need to use on them because the plants can take care of themselves. Though I know that there's the issue with like how much the plant can then produce, but there's some suggestions because the soil in GMO plant fields are much lower than ones where it's organic plants being raised. Those fields that are having organic crops tend to have higher plant yields in general than GMO crops because they don't have a microbiome that's supporting the plant roots and and there's not as much nutrients and natural defenses getting into the plants.
Well, you raised an awful lot of points just now, and I would like to pro-offer that I've seen, first of all, you mentioned soil health, and I think that many scientists, many farmers, many citizens would raise their arms in support of the notion that soil health is our most important resource when it comes to crop productivity. And there are some actual government programs that support soil husbandry. We've reduced our reliance on moldboard plowing, and soil conservation has really changed in this country in terms of bulk density, keeping bulk density low by alternative tillage. But you also, so soil health, the maintenance of soil health, without question, will have a lot of positive effects. You mentioned some issues of glyphosate being water soluble and therefore being dangerous. I know that glyphosate is a herbicide. It actually has a very low residual life. It breaks down rather quickly when it hits the soil, and it doesn't have a lot of residue, glyphosate. And I know of no published studies that I've seen that talk about glyphosate in terms of a danger because it's water soluble and in humans. So I would love for someone to send me some journal articles or any journal articles addressing that point. I know of no evidence in the refereed literature about those issues. So I'm saying I don't know.
I could give a couple of comments on the question or comments raised about the chemical use, pesticides use. If you look at the agricultural history, particularly Green Revolution, started from 1950 to 1980. For that 30 years, we have drastic increase in the food production. Chemical use contribute to that increase drastically. Two types of chemicals. One is nitrogen fertilizer, another one is pesticides. Without using these two types of chemicals, we don't have what we have today for so much food production. So that's one of the problems. If we don't use these pesticides, we're going to have problem. Farmer will not have such a good yield. So that is a challenge. We're hoping that maybe some of this new genetic technology may be able to help to reduce the use of pesticides, such as BT corn, BT cotton. You can see that at least in this BT corn field, cotton field, those pesticides use has been reduced. Of course, there may be other problems associated with. So we cannot afford not to use these pesticides. But at the same time, we do see a lot of problems. So it's a challenging situation.
Can I just kind of respond to both of those since I got the mic? When it comes to increased production through the use of synthetic chemicals, that is, so often quoted that we wouldn't have as much as we have now if we didn't have these chemicals. But the fact is that here in the United States, we have surplus of many foods. We have things that go to waste that we don't use and that we can't easily transport to the places in the world where they most need it. And if we get them there, we can't easily distribute there. So we're focusing on using synthetics to increase production. To what end? That's the response to that. And when it comes to the glyphosate, I didn't bring it up because it's only marginally related to this conversation about GMOs. But my reading, and I'll try to find it and send it to you, when the first Roundup thing came up, the first big lawsuit, because I work in an industry where we sell these chemicals, I did some digging, because I'm more leaning towards organics. I prefer to educate people very thoroughly if they're going to buy chemicals so that they know what they're buying and how to apply it safely and what they're doing with it. So my research, what I found is that while glyphosate specifically does have a very short-term residual, it is not the glyphosate alone that we're concerned about so much as the derivatives as it begins breaking down, what it breaks down into. And that varies considerably based on the soil health. So that's the article I'll try to find for you.
Okay, please do.
Yeah, so I think it's not uncommon for discussions of genetic engineering to move into discussions of farming systems. And maybe that's a natural place for it to end up. But my hesitation here is that I think it's, I think it gets kind of difficult to make progress, because every one of us has opinions and thoughts about which farming systems maybe are the best. And this is a very respectful discussion, and I appreciate that, but it can become divisive and without good ends. And the other thing that I want to add is that we scientists who work in agriculture and have knowledge and experience and so on with conventional agriculture, we totally respect the need to focus on unintended consequences, and we do. We're often the ones that identify some of those issues. I think every choice we make about farming systems has unintended consequences. And so I want to challenge the audience to think about what those might be for your favorite farming system.
Question, Reggie.
All right, so just a little side note here, just kind of in case after you leave this, something to look up. It's called the Soil My Undies Challenge, and farmers are literally burying 100% cotton underwear into their soil to see if their soil microbiome, as mentioned there, can actually break it down. So fun thing to look up later and see the progress. That's pretty cool. But I do have a question for Mr. Dr. Berkowitz, and I was wondering, to your knowledge, how large farms in the Midwest and across the nation are dealing to reduce nutrient runoff, and if any particular farming practices such as no-till might be something that they are looking into.
Thank you. You asked me about nitrogen use in a major crop area. You also asked me about no-till agriculture. Well, no-till agriculture is really increasing. For conventional crops, it's a little harder with vegetable crops because you're looking for more even germination, what have you. But even with vegetable crops, you're seeing a proliferation of no-till agriculture, and where you're disturbing the soil less, and that allows for soil health. So I think that's increasing, and that will increase the ability of the soil not to have. Will that increase the ability to reduce nitrate runoff? Can anyone think of that? Would no-till increase or reduce the nitrate runoff?
Depends on when it's applied.
So nitrogen is so mobile.
Right.
You can have rain, and but would a no-till cropping system, I think, could have advantages for keeping soil health and having inorganic nitrogen metabolized by bacteria. The more soil bacteria you have, the more organic nitrogen form you're going to have in the soil. The more no-till, the reduced bulk density in a no-till system would allow for and also you have a lot of other reasons why you're going to increase microbial populations, and that's got to have a positive effect on nitrogen runoff. So that's my scratching my head thinking to answer your question.
I think that these are really good points. One of the things no-till system does is reduces the amount of surface runoff itself, because you're getting more infiltration into the soil. And because amount of surface runoff is reduced, everything that goes with surface runoff water gets reduced. There may be a trade-off, because now you're getting more infiltration. There may be more nitrate getting into the shallow groundwater, and that need to be accounted. But along with that, also there is a significantly less erosion that takes place. And so the nitrogen that is phosphorus or any other chemicals, pesticides that are binded to the sediment, there will be less losses happening because no-till reduces the erosion. And that was one of the primary reasons how the new no-till became so popular in the US and continue to increase. We will make that as a last question.
We have focused a great deal, in fact almost exclusively tonight, on the GMO concepts is based on what the United States looks like. What do we as consumers, what do we as academics look at for GMOs here? I guess I would argue from the production standpoint that we as a country probably should not be putting together a policy that is so restrictive for safety purposes alone that we restrict the farmer's ability to export crops to wherever, corn, soybeans, and so on. I think back to the 1960s and 70s when there was great concern about population growth, and every single one of the land-grant colleges, and the guys sitting for your seats back then, went to other countries and worked on ways to just, at the macro level, produce food better. India and Pakistan and the Middle East areas there is coming to mind, going from wet rice to dryland rice. Huge increases. And so my concern is, if we as a nation, if we as a country put together a national policy that is extraordinarily restrictive for our own safe food, what is that going to do to food production for population growth across the world? Should not the GMO emphasis balanced be less on pesticides and that sort of thing, worried about it, and more on just raw production of getting the crop out the field, which in turn is going to increase the ability of the production farmer in the United States to survive. Right now it's getting less and less and less ability to survive simply because they're more efficient, which is very, very exactly what you mentioned. To what end are we producing better food if it's not going overseas? And if we put together a policy that's so restrictive that stops that, I think we got a major problem.
What policies are you referring to that would restrict ability for food exports. I don't know.
Well, if you put together Monsanto, DeKalb, Pioneer, all the major food, the major seed producers, if they're restricted from being able to put together genetic strains that are considered to be GMO, in many of the countries overseas, someplace say we won't accept GMO type things, but we will produce something that is transgenic that will be able to double the production of what may be. If our GMO labels on there restrict that seed production, they can't, our farmers can't produce that feed or that seed to be able to go overseas to generate more food.
Okay. Well, I don't understand how labeling either a crop is or is not transgenic, and Europe or a foreign country is either going to allow or not allow transgenic crops. And I don't understand how any kind of policy regarding GMOs would influence that, but that's beyond my realm of understanding, so I should just be quiet and say goodnight and thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. I learned a lot tonight. Certainly my knowledge about many of the issues related to GMO has increased, and I hope that so is yours. And so I suggest that don't stop the conversations here. Whatever side of the GMO you are on, continue the conversations, continue to seek the truth, and most importantly, continue to seek the science-based information so that you can make better decisions on whatever side you are on, and that your decision should be based on the facts and should be based on the science. I want to thank the three distinguished panelists for bringing the science-based information and for engaging our audience on a number of really excellent questions tonight. So thank you so much. I want to thank our team and student volunteers for putting this event together. And again, thank you so much for coming to this panel discussion. Good night.